Because I hear it every day. Well, thank you. I mean, I'm in public figure. The only thing is what is missing is my You know, but Daniel, you should say, well, your wife was in customer service, you know, you saved a lot of money. Exfoliation of my wife's fingers. It's darling, I love you so much. You know what I do? The animal drug tries to get rid of the lice. What?
Okay, good morning. I think we'll get started. You're a little spread out, so I'll just be doing this a little bit more than usual. Okay, welcome. Thank you for joining. I'm here accompanied by the Vice President of the Staff Council and the Secretary of the Staff Council, Stefano Bertarami and Daniel Breedy. And what I wanted to do was just to brief you on the status regarding the mobility framework and highlight a few key elements and try to answer any questions you have or hear any comments. This is a very informal information sharing and exchange of information, and I want to begin with a couple of caveats here. This is not a training or an official briefing on any procedures or administrative instructions. That will come, I imagine, when everything is finalized.
It has nothing to do with Umoja.
Let's see if we can find some links to Umoja. Hold on. Okay. And so while I realize a little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, I will in no way be exhaustive because, as I said, nothing is finalized yet. Things are subject to change, and it's a very complex issue. Having said that, the STAI on staff selection and managed mobility is being drafted, and it's in the final stages. And the managed mobility, and it's expected to begin, the managed mobility process is expected to begin being rolled out in January. So I did want to give staff a kind of heads up so that you're not taken completely by surprise when this does come into effect. Now, I'm certainly no expert on HR. So I, of course, invite HR to jump in if I say something that's not quite accurate or I've excluded something. Also, before going further, I want to note that this framework applies only to the P&D categories of staff and field service staff. So, and field service is not relevant to UNOV, UNODC. So it's P&D staff, basically internationally recruited staff. G staff are not affected by this. Okay. I'm not going to go into a lot of history about this. There have been some already some town halls about this. The chef de cabinet of the SG has given a town hall, and there have been some briefings on the processes a little bit thus far. But for those of you who don't know the background, I'm just going to say a couple of things. In April 2014, a resolution, and I've got these points on the slide. I just have a few slides just to kind of keep track, and also the informational resources may be of use for you. So about a year and a half ago, a resolution was passed containing a new mobility framework. And since that time, staff and management have been working on how to implement it. And implementation with respect to those who have entered the organization as of, let's say, May 2014, so after the resolution was passed, and with respect to those who are already in the organization before May 2014, which is, of course, the majority of staff. Most of the work has been done in the context of the Staff Management Committee, and particularly its working group on mobility and career development. And UNOV, UNODC is very well represented in that working group. We have representation both from the management side and from the staff sides. The working group's work concluded this fall, and I, along with other staff council and associations, provided our comments on a draft STAI, and that should be issued shortly. I also want to mention that in order to better inform the staff and assist in understanding all of this, OHRM is developing a website that's on the slide, and there's a lot of information on there. It is not complete yet, but it's a very good resource to start to refer to if you have any questions. And there's also a report of the most recent report of the Secretary General that's on the slide, and of course you can always come to the Staff Council. Okay, so let's get to some concrete issues. And I'm only going to say a few words. I'm not going to be long. I'm not going to give it, as I said, an exhaustive presentation. I'm going to say a few things that I think are of direct relevance to UNOF and UNODC staff, and then I'm going to open it up for questions and comments. Okay. New staff selection and mobility framework. Once it is finalized and implemented, staff selection for P and D posts positions will be carried out along 2 tracks and in through a semi-annual staffing exercise. Okay, what are the 2 tracks? Track 1 will be, posts will be advertised. There'll be the advertisement of vacant posts. Vacant positions will be advertised and open to applications from internal and external applicants. Similar, there will be some changes, but similar to the procedure now in Inspira and so on. And the second track will be through managed mobility. And what exactly is managed mobility? I'm going to read from the Secretary General's report, and then I will elaborate. But, okay, it's an internal process for the lateral movement of staff in which serving staff members will express interest in encumbered positions. Staff participating in the process will be those who have either A, reached their maximum position occupancy limit, or B, reached their minimum position occupancy limit and choose to opt in. Okay. And this placement of staff in the P and D categories will be facilitated through the circulation of a compendium of posts, a post announcement in each of the semi-annual staffing exercises. And of course, it's the second track, the managed mobility track, that the SMC has been working on. And just to let you know how complicated it has been, we had a running list of issues and outstanding questions, of which there were 190. I'm not going to go through all 190 one by one, so don't worry. But I'm going to highlight a couple of things that I think will be of relevance to you. Okay. Let me kind of rephrase a little bit. Also, very, very bare bones here. This is just to start to kind of acclimate you to these changes. Posts that are identified as rotational, and I'll get to the rotational versus non-rotational issue in a minute, and, as I mentioned before, in which the incumbent has reached their post-occupancy limit, and I'll also get to that in a second, what those limits are, or in which an incumbent has reached their minimum occupancy limit and chooses to opt in, those posts will be placed in a compendium. And there will be several steps in the process, but in brief, a board called the Joint Network Board for P posts up to and including P5, and then another board, the Senior Review Board for D1s and D2s, will decide with inputs from program managers and so on what post you will encumber. Okay, so that's the bare bones of it. Specific issues. Timeline. The new staffing system with both tracks will be phased in over a 5-year period, so beginning in January 2016, which is, as we can all know, very soon, until 2020. the mobility track, managed mobility policy, will be rolled out according to job networks. And they have now created or divvied up all the posts according to nine job networks. For the first year, starting January, one job network will be rolled out. The second year, starting January 2017, a second one. And then after that, 2 job networks per year. And staff would also have the option, when your job network was going to be rolled out for the first time, you will have the option whether to opt in the first year of the job rollout. Which job network will be rolled out in January? It's called POLNET, P-O-L-N-E-T, and consists primarily of political officers. And my understanding is that there are not many political officers in UNOV, UNODC in terms of their posts being classified as such. I believe there's one. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yes? No?
There are none.
Zero.
In UNOV, UNODC, in Vienna-based entities, there are
Okay.
small number.
So this is not going to greatly affect, obviously, the people here in 2016. In 2017, while it has not been decided which job network it will be, there is some talk that it will be some magnet, which is basically management and administrative posts. But again, not decided. And that's why I'm kind of hesitant in this whole forum, because things have not been finalized. But as I said, I want to also give you a heads up. We're already in the second half of November. So if you start hearing about things or the STAI is issued, I want you to have the opportunity to have heard at least a little bit of the background here. The job network, I think, that is most prevalent in UNOV, UNODC is something called DevNet, like short for development, and consists of economic, social, and development posts. And there's some talk of it being rolled out in 2018, but again, these have not been decided. The only sure thing is POLNET will go out in 2016. Okay, so that's the timeline. There are a couple of issues that really are of relevance to UNODC in particular, and that is whether a post is rotational or non-rotational, and the funding source of the posts. Now, rotational posts. In general, these are posts that have been determined to have a comparable position at the same level in another organizational unit. So if you're a P5 economics officer and you are working here, if there's another post that's like that, a P5 with the similar functions classified the same way in another organizational unit, and that unit can be here in the same duty station, or it can be at another duty station, then your post will have been deemed to be rotational. Okay? And then there is no special, and this is a bit of a tricky point, but in terms of the way this is being looked at by OHRM, that it does not require an advanced level or a specialized level of expertise to do that particular post. Okay? Non-rotational posts are, of course, the others. They require an advanced level of expertise and knowledge in a technical field for which there is no other comparable post in the system. Now, there was an initial exercise done a while ago in which non-rotational posts were identified and I think this was about a year ago or so. And I believe for UNOV, UNODC, there were 3. Having said that, my understanding is that the issue of which posts will be rotational or non-rotational for a job network will be assessed prior to the rollout of that job network. So right now, I believe in the most recent report for PaulNet, they have determined there are, I think, 6 posts. This is UN-wide that are non-rotational. When the next job network rolls out, there will be a review of those posts in that network to determine which ones would be non-rotational and so on. Okay. And another issue has to do with the funding source. And this is, again, of particular concern to UNODC because we have, as you all know, so many XB posts. And this has been a point of discussion in great depth in the working group. Currently, where do we stand on this? And this, again, is current. Staff members in the managed mobility track, remember, will be placed on rotational posts. So first, the post has to be considered rotational. And rotational posts that are funded for 1 year or longer through regular budget, support account, and peacekeeping operations, but peacekeeping doesn't affect us directly, and voluntary contributions and other XB sources. That's the wording now. Again, it's not finalized, but that's where it stands. There's a however in here, though. If the position is directly financed by project funds or other XB resources, where the sole purpose of that funding is to execute a project in a particular time frame, those posts may be excluded from the managed mobility program. Okay? So, and that's the thinking now. So if you're on a project, if you were hired to do a project for, I don't know, 1 year or 8 months, and you only do that one particular job and that particular project, and so then that post may be excluded from the managed mobility track. Keep in mind, there is always in parallel another track, which is the vacancy track. Right? But I'm focusing here, of course, on managed mobility because that's the big development. Also, posts that are slotted for abolition or proposed reduction or downsizing will not be included in the semi-annual exercise. And this will be done, these tracks are intended to be done on a semi-annual basis. Okay, now I know that this is very hard to absorb, but that's why I'm trying to keep it simple. And we can ask questions in a minute. Okay. When this comes up, and if you have reached your post-occupancy limits and so on, and it's time to go into managed mobility, the participating staff will be asked to express an interest in at least 3 posts in the job network and in the compendium at their same category and grade level, of course. If the staff does not express an interest, apparently OHRM plans to remind you. And if you still do not express an interest, the Job Network Board will recommend the placement to a position that they deem suitable for you. And to assist staff in deciding which post to express interest in, all the position announcements will contain the source of funding for the position. Okay. Now, I mentioned maximum and minimum post-occupancy limits. Maximum post-occupancy limits, and these apply to the managed mobility track. For H and A duty stations, and Vienna is an H duty station, it is 7 years. For B and C duty stations, 4 years, and for D and E duty stations, 3 years. And we've got a lot of staff, as you know, in the field serving in these duty stations, so it's particularly important. In terms of the minimum post-occupancy limits, for H, A, B, and C duty stations, it's 2 years right now, and D and E duty stations, 1 year. So if you're a staff member in Kabul and you've been on your post for 1 year or more, you can, when your job network comes up to be rolled out, you can choose to opt in. If you are placed, if the job network boards try to place you on, propose to place you on a post that you have not expressed interest in, and you feel that it is not acceptable to you because it requires a change of duty station, there is something called the Special Constraints Panel. So if all of a sudden, I don't know, somebody in Vienna, let's say, is designated to go to Santiago, and they did not express an interest in that post, if for medical reasons or compelling personal circumstances, and again I can elaborate a little bit on all these later, or if it's in the interest of the organization for you not to change duty stations, you can submit a request to the Special Constraints Panel to have your move waived, the request for your remove waived. And the Joint Network Board and the Senior Review Board for the D1 and D2 levels will be take those findings into consideration when completing their recommendations for placement. A couple of transitional measures I want to mention to you. Eligibility for promotions, or eligibility requires for promotion in the P and higher categories will continue to apply as they are now until December 2020. So, but as of January 1st, 2021, all staff will be required to satisfy a geographic move for promotion to the P5 level. So there are still a number of years, but if you are wanting to move to the P5 level, you will have to have had one geographic move. Rostered candidates. If you are on a roster, you will retain your roster status for 7 years from the first day of the month in which the job network is rolled out. And of course, that's phased in. And for those job networks that are not being rolled out over the next, year, 2 or 3, the regular staff selection system to fill vacancies will be maintained. I have a few other things I could say. Well, actually, I have a lot of other things I could say, but let me just mention a couple of outstanding issues, and then I will open up the floor for either questions or comments. Some of the outstanding issues. Number one, in the resolution of 2014, it stated that the number of moves in 2016-17 of the job network being rolled out. So the number of moves in PolNet in 2016-17 shall not exceed the number of moves for that network in 2014-2015. So you can't have more moves for PoleNet people, for example, in 16-17 as 14-15. The issue is what happens if in the middle of 16-17 they've reached the cap, they've reached the number of moves, and they can't go beyond it. What will happen then? That's still something outstanding. Another issue, and it's something that the working group has really been insistent upon, is that there really should be a workforce reshaping or downsizing policy in place prior to the rollout of this. Because when you're starting to talk about abolition of posts or restructuring or downsizing, this is going to be directly relevant in the way this whole thing is being implemented. There is not one in place, but the efforts to have one in place are going to be amplified in the coming months. And there's also and these are just a couple of things I'm putting on the table. Let's say you are a P4 and you're in a particular duty station, and the Special Constraints Panel and the board has decided you cannot move, let's say for medical reasons. Will that mean that you will never be eligible for promotion to the P5? Because through no fault, so there are many outstanding issues. It's much more complex than I presented, but I did want to give an opportunity to staff to hear a little bit before January and before the STAI is rolled out. And I think at this point, I will just leave it. I could speak about this for many hours, but let you express your views or hear your questions, and I will do my very best to answer them. Thanks. Yes, Elena.
Irka, well, first of all, thank you so much for bringing up to speed. What I want to ask you is something I really did not understand. Just now you were talking about the issue of roster status, that you maintain it for 7 years. Here I was a little bit confused. I don't understand which roster status you're talking about exactly, if you can.
If you are rostered as being eligible for a certain type of position, like the network, like in your category.
Like if I applied for some position and I got rostered for that position and didn't get the job, this kind of roster, yeah, okay, thank you.
Irka, maybe I can add something to that. Currently, you're also rostered for the position that you have been selected for, if you were selected under the new staffing policy since 2010. So at least at a minimum for the position that you are selected for, you are on the roster. And you can see your roster membership in Inspira. If you log into Inspira, there's a tab there, My Roster Membership. And there you see what rosters you're... Well, if you're only rostered for the position that you've been selected for and not for a higher level, then it's for your same level, yes? And right now, those roster memberships don't expire. But as Irka said, once your job network goes live, there will be then a limitation of the duration of the roster membership.
Thank you very much. That was a very useful briefing. What qualifies as a geographical move? Because I know at the present time, some of the moves that some of us have had didn't qualify. Is that somehow expanded upon? Do more of, like, for example, in my case, I was an associate expert in the field, but that didn't qualify. Does it now qualify according to that new system?
Sorry, Rika, because this was one of the things that was discussed at length with the administration, because there was the idea that the period of service as an associate expert was not fully, let's say, part of being a staff member. But then my recollection was that because in the previous exercise, mobility exercise, and there have been cases that I quoted here in Vienna, the associate expert move were considered as valid then the idea was that this geographic move would count throughout your UN career. For example, if you had moved even outside the Secretariat, if you had worked with WHO or UNDP, and then in another duty station, then came into the Secretariat in Vienna or somewhere else, that would have constituted constitutes a geographic move. So by the same token, I think being in an associate expert and having served for 2 years or 1 year minimum in the field, and then moving to a quarter or another duty station should constitute a geographic move. But I don't know if it has been a final decision on this.
I think that is how it stands now. But again, we'll see what happens. Jakob.
Thank you for the briefing, Erka. Are you in a position to elaborate on the composition of the Special Constraints Panel? Will it be a centralized body, or will Vienna also have one?
I can give you the details on that. Let's see, how many will we have? It will be composed of people from various job networks, so not all the same network, because in the central, not in the Central Review Board, in the Joint Network Board and the Senior Review Boards, it's the same. The people on those boards are from the network in which they're dealing with. So the Special Constraints Panel will be composed of people from various job networks. There will be a staff representative as observer from the staff side, but staff, we're talking now at large. And the focal points for women, there will be a representative there as a focal point for women, also as an observer. In terms of Vienna per se, I cannot say if we will be represented on it or not. And I think there will be about 14 people, if I'm not mistaken, in total, plus the alternates.
But mostly senior officials. Huh?
Yeah, senior officials, P5 and above.
Thank you. I wanted to ask whether or not we will carry forward the mobility we have already acquired. Having worked in several duty stations already, it would be a shame if it's all sort of reset with the next.
And that's my understanding, sure. In terms of the mobility requirement, the geographic mobility requirement to be promoted, it can be at any, right now it's at any point in your career. You would need to have had one geographic move by 2021 in order to be promoted to the P5 level. But if you've been in your current post for 7 years and your network is being rolled out and your post is rotational and has 1 year of funding, then yes, you will be going into the managed mobility exercise and your post will be included in the compendium. But again, mobility doesn't only mean geographic move. I can move functions and go to the office across the hall from me, but it wouldn't count as a geographic move for the purposes of promotion.
Can you use the microphone? Mike.
The 7-year period, the maximum post-occupancy limit, when does that start to run? From the time the network is rolled out, or it can like retroactively, so I might immediately be up for management. I think there is a disagreement between the two of you.
When your network is rolled out, if you've been on the post for 7 years, then you go into the pool. Your post goes into the pool, all other things, all other requirements being met. It's not that you start the clock of your occupancy on the day that your network rolls out.
sorry, just to give some background, because some people may ask, how did you agree to all this? Which looks very much
What, did we agree?
like...
Did we agree?
No, well, it looks like very much like another Umoja. But no, I just want to recap that this, let's say, project or this process has been negotiated for over 10 years. And at the beginning, the position of the staff side, not only here from Vienna, but also from other duty stations, was that this would not work for several reasons. However, within the staff various duty stations, there were divisions, because you can imagine that people in Nairobi, Addis Ababa, Bangkok, Beirut, and Santiago, they also people in the field, they wanted to have the possibility to move because they were applying and were not getting selected, etc., etc. On the other hand, there was also people from Vienna, Geneva, New York, particularly New York, who were not in favor of this. So we had very, many discussions, many fightings, over the meeting that we had. And at one point, we had to go for a compromise, which is what basically you have in front. Not only a compromise with the administration, but also a compromise among the various staff unions, which unfortunately was not agreed by New York among the various staff unions that did not still do. I mean, New York is the staff union that still does not agree to the proposal. So this was the process. So it was not easy, and what came out is not perfect. It's far from perfect, but at least we were able to, or we tried to, over time, to contain some of the negative impact on staff. There would be some, obviously, negative impact, but this is one thing. The second thing is also that the major revolution that is happening, I don't know if it's clear, but basically is for managers. So managers will no longer be in a position to select their staff. So the selection process that is taking place now, where you have to review the candidates and go through the interview, etc., that will be gone, because the decision has been to basically give this responsibility to this board. If you are familiar, basically this will happen a little bit like the management reassignment program, because the manager will receive a list of candidates that have expressed their interest in that position and that being considered, let's say, eligible to have the qualifications, and basically the manager will be allowed to express his or her preference among some of those and send it back to the panel, to the network, the joint, what is called? Joint network board. Joint network board. But at the end of the day, the decision will be made by the network board, taking into consideration the manager preference, but not only that. And certainly it would be, for example, the fact that you have served in the field may be one of the criteria for you to move to an headquarters duty station, et cetera, et cetera. So this is another, big revolution that is going to happen, and that would make, an individual manager may end up spending less time in the selection process, but then you will have to live with what you get. So this is another element that needs to be taken into consideration.
No, thanks, Stefano, for that background. As it's been going on, Stefano was involved in the earlier days. I've only really been involved in this in the past year and a half. So that's where I came in. And yes, while the managers will be able to provide inputs, as Stefano said, at the end of the day, it's going to be the Job Network Board who recommends the assignments to the to OHRM, the ASG, for human resources. And I think originally some of the impetus for this came from various duty stations, and if you even read the reports and so on, one of the goals here, the intentions, is to have a better distribution of burden sharing of people who are in various hardship locations. So if you read the reports, that's one of the goals here, is to have a more equal distribution. Yeah, okay. Okay, Antoine.
Thank you, Urka, for the briefing. Just one point is not clear to me. When you say a network will be rolled out, say in 2017, does that mean that all the moves in that exercise are done during that 1 year and then the whole process is put on hold for another 6 or 7 years? Or does it mean that it starts then and keeps going?
It starts then and keeps going, that track. And it's done, again, it'll be quite different on a semi-annual basis. So it will not be a rolling thing. These boards and so on are foreseen to be meeting twice a year for a great length of time to discuss all of this. And you can imagine how difficult this is going to be just logistically. In terms of identifying the posts, and I mean there are flow charts in many different reports and in working papers of how this will go. I'm not going to present that to you because I don't know what even the final stage is. But it's in terms of logistics, I think it may be quite challenging. And my understanding is that while they will begin to start to be identifying, let's just use 2016 in Polnet as an example, starting to identify posts and so on that will go into the compendium in 2016 and start that process. The foreseen second track, where there are vacancy announcements that will be assessed on a semi-annual basis, will not begin until right now it's March, April, May. But then for a time, but you'll still have your regular track. So for a few months, I see that there will be 3 tracks but I don't want to, and again, confuse you even further than you are, or confuse myself further than I am on some issues. Yes?
Thank you for the briefing. Just one question. In a married couple, if both are staff members and their posts come to a rotation, would they be taken into consideration and be posted at the same duty station, or how? Thank you.
That's a very good question. And again, as Stefano said, we are not the architects of this whole policy, although we have been providing, are we the architects?
We contributed.
We contributed, yes. And we provided inputs, and we've reached agreement on most things. Yeah, good question. There will be, and even if you go to the HR portal, you will see, well, to answer your question, in short, there is no, as I see it now, no obligation to hire the spouse if one is moved to another duty station. However, lots of measures are supposed to be taken to assist the spouse in finding work or adjusting and having measures for the spouse. And I think there's already a slot in the HR portal on that. Whether it's completely up and running, I'm not sure. Yeah, Stefano.
Sorry, but because we raised this point during the discussion a lot. So, but apart from what could be done in changing the current regulation, within the current regulation, we asked for a few things, very simple. First of all, that especially without pay, due to the change of the duty station of one of the members of the couple, let's say, would be granted to the spouse and open-ended. This was one of the things that we requested, because clearly this is a request from the organization, and if the other spouse wants to take, especially without pay, to follow the husband or the wife, etc., then this should be granted open-ended, especially without pay, until he or she is able to find another post. Also, there is a case where you have a staff member who is a P, whose spouse is a G, is locally recruited. Then what happened then is not, there are a number of cases. So, for example, we proposed that the G staff could follow, and that should be given, he or she should be given, preferential, if you like, route for local recruitment, for example. That was another thing that we proposed. So I think this is, as Irka said, it's in the making, but I think the thing that they didn't go for it was that they were going to give because what may happen is that you are already expired, one member of the couple expired 7 years on the job, then the other member's not. So what happens? Okay, he or she joins and says, I'm going to try. Then what happens? Of course, one thing one can do is can put forward a special request to the special constraint panel to say, we apply for this duty station. So if we are to be moved, it would be best if we are moved to the same duty station. This could be something that should be reviewed by the special constraint panel, for example.
Thank you, Irka. Sorry. Maybe would you like to expand a little bit more on the issue of type of post and type of contract of the incumbent? You briefly mentioned the fact that extra budgetary post with funds for over a year will be part of the reassigned managed mobility, whatever it's called. But what happens if a holder of a permanent contract or a continuing contract who is actually occupying a regular budget post is then moved, is then reassigned to an extra budgetary post where the funds are available maybe just for 2.5 years? So what will happen to the holder of that permanent contract or a continuing contract? Thanks.
Good question. And that question has come up. As it stands right now, the scenario which you mentioned, the person would need to move onto an extra budgetary post. To take this a step further, let's say we take that scenario and the funding isn't even there for 2 years, or you said 2.5 years? Let's say the funding is there for 1 year. Then what? If you are a permanent contract holder, and correct me if I'm wrong, the organization has a duty to make an effort to find you another position. And I was reading in one of the reports that the average length of time to fill a position, I think, was 6 months. So I guess the organization would have to start looking very soon for another position for you, I would guess. And I also, and how this will mesh with the fact that there should be, when you're considering people for posts, preference, that the order of preference is, and again, correct me, permanent contract holders, continuous, and fixed term. No?
You're talking about right now? No. Right now, there is no such preference for considering.
For downsizing.
Yeah, that's why the downsizing
policy exactly.
Important element
exactly.
has to be defined.
Exactly. So how that will work in all of this is tricky.
No, may I add something to Monica's question? So now, if it happens now that your post is abolished and you are the holder of a permanent appointment, or also if you're not the holder of a permanent appointment, the OHRM generally says, look, 2 applications, etc., but we cannot impose on the manager the selection of a case that is in need of a placement. This is what you hear now, I think. Because according to the rules, the responsibility for the selection remains with the manager. Now, with the new system, the responsibility for selection is with the network board. So it's no longer with the manager. So if there is a case, and there will be cases like the one that you have described that become placement problem, we are pressing the administration to give in the network board these cases priority, because the network board will be in a position to exercise a placement by authority, despite the indication of the manager. So this, according to us, should not become a big problem, and the organization should not be able to hide behind the excuse that they cannot be placed. So this is what we are pressing for, but it is not yet clear in the administrative instructions.
And again, as Bettina said, I mean, that is why we are really fighting to have a workforce reshaping and downsizing policy in place.
Ilka, sorry if I take the floor for the second time. Just to ask, you said before that the network, the committee network, will meet twice a year. So what happens if in between this?
It's funny, I've raised some of the same questions. Yeah, in the cases, and this is not so applicable for us, but in cases of startup and surge operations, this is mainly for peacekeeping and so on, you can, an exceptional measure can be made, like if a peacekeeping mission all of a sudden opens up. But, yeah. Unless there's some extenuating circumstance, it waits.
Yeah, thanks, Ilka. I'm not sure that I've understood correctly one very basic principle. Is it possible that you'll be applying for jobs that are still occupied, and that you may be selected for a job and be waiting for that job to come free because the person had the post in the compendium and was also looking for another job, but is actually still occupying his or her job? And
I'm not sure I understand.
When you place your post in a compendium,
yes,
people will be applying for it.
They will be expressing an interest in it.
But they can't apply for it until it's actually vacant?
No, before.
It will, I think it's 6 months before. So it will be, you're not applying, you're expressing it in the managed mobility track. You're expressing an interest for certain posts. Let's say there's one particular post you're interested in. At that point, the post, may not be vacant, but it will be, the person will have reached their post incumbency limit by the time I think it's 6 months, within 6 months. So by the time you express at the time you express an interest, it may not be vacant. Mm-hmm. But by the time that semi-annual exercise is complete, it should be vacant.
So there's no danger of a chain building up, as in buying a house?
Theoretically not.
No, obviously not. I'm glad. Thank you.
Yeah.
Erika, it might be useful just to recap what you said about there is the managed mobility, which will only include encumbered posts, so staff with their posts. And yes, there is a chain. It's basically they will move amongst each other, and any vacant post has to be advertised. This is what the General Assembly, originally the idea was to also have vacant posts in this pool of posts. But now the General Assembly asked that vacant posts be advertised so that externals and everyone can apply for it. So there's really two different tracks, the vacancy track and the managed mobility track. And for managed mobility, they will always be encumbered.
Okay, so if I'm in a post for 3 years and I retire, that post may not be in the managed mobility compendium, but maybe the vacancy will be advertised as it is now.
Thanks. Actually, one follow-up to this question, whether there can be an overlap. I understand the explanation being that basically in this managed track, you would normally have only those people who have reached the maximum occupancy level, so naturally there shouldn't be any sort of backlog. At the same time, you have the option to opt in before you've reached the maximum. And if in that case somehow placement doesn't materialize, wouldn't that then lead exactly to the situation where a person still remains on the post, other people have expressed interest for it but cannot, So that's one question, is that understanding correct, that due to this there might still be a problem? The second question is that, to me, this managed track sounds very much, and I think Stefano said it briefly, sounds very much like the ongoing managed reassignment program for P2 staff. If I'm not entirely mistaken, there is a principle there, the way it's managed, is that the maximum number of moves is what determines really what happens in terms of the rotation between the posts. So let's say if I express interest in post A, the person sitting on post A has expressed an interest in post B, and there's a long enough chain, this is the one that will determine how people are moving, not so much the preference expressed. Is this really the model that's going to be applied then to all levels of posts, is my question. Thank you.
The minimum limit, the case of the minimum occupancy limit. I mean, these are all very, very good questions, and we've had the same ones. If I've reached the minimum occupancy limit and I decide, okay, I want to move out of this post, I want to be mobile, I can express that I am willing for my post and me to be put into the compendium, and other people can express an interest. If nobody does, or whatever, I think that you would not have to, you would have to wait until they find someone, or until somebody expresses an interest, or they assign someone. I don't know if that's probably not answering your question. Stefano will answer.
No, I mean, I don't know if I answered. What I see is that probably this will be like a little bit the management reassignment program on steroids, because it will be much bigger than the management reassignment program, because it will not be on a voluntary basis. And so they may, I don't know if they have it clear in OHRM, because they are also developing together with us. So, but there may be that you will have 100 people expressing interest, and then the post available would be, in theory, 120, let's say. There could be that difference that may then allow the network to place more people in, or to have a broader choice, or there could be the possibility that you have to then say to some people, sorry, you cannot move for this year. So they will be then put forward for the next exercise. This can happen. I'm not sure whether, if it's managed by Umoja, it will happen for sure, but not. But we'll have to work out a system together with the administration. From our side, I think it's, but the model is the one of the management reassignment program.
But if I can, my understanding is also, and in this program, people, the staff, the people involved can express an interest in, I think, up to 6 posts, and they will be placed on one of those 6 that they express an interest in. In the managed mobility policy, that's not the case. You can express an interest of a minimum of 3 posts, but then if it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get one of the ones that you expressed an interest in. So I think that's also a major difference between that program and the current one. And for the young professionals, it's they 6 posts they express an interest in, they get one of those 6. Managed mobility, no guarantee.
Can I continue that scenario of that permanent contracted person, staff, sitting on a regular budget? and will go and take up a position somewhere, don't ask me where, the UN is a big family, and would be sitting on a project post for 1 year. Yeah.
If it is, right now as it stands, if it is purely a project post funded by a post funded for the sole purpose of carrying out a particular project in a time limit, it does not go into the compendium.
Okay, then let me change it, rephrase it, or adapt it. Then it's just on extra budgetary, but put it that way, it's more of a volatile position. So the person then encumbering my former post would have the chance to then, for the next 7 years, to kind of act and work. And what about my humble self now sitting there? There is no commitment by the organization to place me somewhere. There is the so-called goodwill, I guess. But imagine if I would be close, not that close, to retirement. Would I be then most probably ending up losing my job? So that would be one question. The other one, what about the so-called constraints? How would you define them? I mean, we picked up, are there other constraints there? And then the issue is this kind of selection, or the so-called, who decides whether my post is indispensable? And which posts were exempted in UNODC, you know, so these highly skilled, I guess, technical posts. Thank you.
Okay, let me get started. I mean, we have on the first question about the P and RB and to XB. Yes, the person who is who will be encumbering your original post, the post occupancy limit will be what it is, 7 years, 4 years, whatever. What will happen if your funding, if the XB funding is no longer available for you? Very good question. That's why we have to have a downsizing, reshaping policy in place. I have no further, I think that's a big issue, particularly for UNODC, where you've got 80 to 90% of the posts as being XB funded. A huge issue that has taken many hours of discussion on that and so on. Okay. Special constraints. What are they? Right now, they're categorized. They're roughly 3 categories. One is for medical reasons, where you would submit documentation and so on to medical services, and they would decide, or they would give their recommendation as to whether or not you're cleared or not to go. There's compelling personal circumstances that, again, you would submit your case to the Special Constraints Board. A couple of examples that have come up in the course of this discussion in that regard are the case of if you are, let's say you have children and you are divorced from your spouse, and you're talking about visitation rights to your child. What happens then? Another issue has come up in the context of UN Globe. What if you are, let's say you are gay and you are being posted now to a country that which is very hostile and even has legislation? Will you be exempt then? I mean, UN Globe has been very good and has been very active in this regard. So those, whatever the case is, you put, if we're, you will really suffer undue hardship by that geographic move. And thirdly, if it is necessary for you to stay in order to carry out the mandate of the work. And in that case, you and the program manager would have to submit your case or their justification. You would have to do it together with the program manager to the Special Constraints Panel to say that, no, this person can't move right now because he or she has to complete the job. Those are roughly the 3 main categories that they foresee right now. Okay. Rotational posts. There were, in the initial exercise, which I think was about 2 years ago, correct me if I'm wrong, there were 3 posts that were identified as non-rotational, and I believe they were in the lab. The tentative list of rotational posts was circulated about a year when I came on board, and there was a lot of commotion about that because there were certain duty stations who listed a lot of non-rotational posts, and there seemed to be a disproportionate of high-level posts that were non-rotational, which was a little bit surprising considering that we often say that at the higher levels of management and director levels, you have transferable skills and so on. So as a result of our inputs, the situation is as it is. I mentioned before a job network is rolled out, that list will be revisited. I think at the time 2 years ago, the list was submitted by management with input from the directors or something to that effect. Again, and it will be in now, when the job network is rolled out, there will be inputs from the relevant office, and the recommendations will be decided upon or so on or determined by the job network board. So the job network board will review it and say, yes, we agree this post is rotational, this post isn't, and they will be in a large part determining that. Some of the criteria for that, and language services, for those in language services, your posts are largely non-rotational. I think if there's a certain language, there's a certain category of languages, of language posts that will, at least for a while, I think, be considered non-rotational. But don't quote me on that. Again, I'm getting, okay, no, okay, then I'm confused, which wouldn't be the first time, or the last. And what you're supposed to be looking at is if there's a comparable level in another organization. Okay, so for instance, I was in terrorism prevention branch. The comparable posts would be in CTED in New York. That's probably the only comparable post in the units, or what we, outside of this office. But the idea is that there has to be some very unique aspect about the post, a very unique requirement, very specialized. And I guess we take the lab, for example, some of the people in the lab, if they have expertise, I don't know, in chemical compositions of illicit and illicit drugs and so on, where else would you have that needed? So that's the general thinking in terms of rotational and non-rotational. The special training and the specialized knowledge, and whether there's a comparable post elsewhere. I mean, when we saw the first list of non-rotational posts, we were a little bit surprised because there were certain posts in a certain duty station where they said, well, we've cleared those posts non-rotational because they require a certain language skill. Well, whoa, there's a lot of posts that require a certain language skill. I'm not talking, luckily we're revisiting that whole issue as the network rolls out. Was there something else, Nabila?
Hi, thank you very much for having this briefing. It's been very useful. Just a couple of points. Has the impact on women been considered in this whole process, in particular how this is going to affect the need to achieve gender balance? And how will this process now move forward? You say a lot of these things are undecided. What is the next steps and how is that going to be decided so that some of these things that are not clear yet will be made clearer? And then just one other point. You talked about this limit for PolNet of the number of geographical moves being linked to the number of geographical moves in this current biennium. when they start next year. Will that restriction on the limit be applied to the other job networks in the future, or is it just for the Polnet in the first instance? Thank you.
I'll take the last question first. It's for whatever job network is rolled out, or job networks that are rolled out in 2016-17. So the job network rolled out in 2016 is Polnet, so it's applicable for Polnet in 2016, and then the job network rolled out. And as I said earlier, it will continue. It's not that Polnet will stop in 2017. It will start in 2016, go into 2017, and in 2017, there will be another job network. So whatever job network is rolled out, or job networks are rolled out in 16-17, okay? Things that are undecided, let me put it this way. I don't know if they're okay, a couple of things. When I say undecided or they haven't quite figured out how to work them out, we've been told that there will be nothing is engraved in stone. So if issues come up as they go along, they will be worked out, or there will be an attempt to be worked out. Some of the issues may be decided and may appear in the STAI, but it's not official. Basically what I'm saying, I don't know. It could still be subject to change. Staff has been very much involved in all of this, but management, or the powers that be, do not have to have our agreement. They would like to, and in almost all cases, we've come up to an agreement, but they still have the prerogative to not do what. I've express my viewpoint on a few things that are not reflected in the current state of play on this policy. And then women, I don't think that in this policy there's been a particular emphasis on gender directly. The job network boards will need to, when they take into consideration all of the posts and organizational functions and looking at the compendium and so on, gender and geographic balance, they need to take that into consideration. And there may be some indirect effects, like with if you've got, children maybe you have a child who has a medical condition that they can only get treated in a certain, but that's not so much of a gender thing. That a father can have the same issues. Some of the more of the gender-related things do come up in other forum, like in the current compensation review, but we're not talking about, not direct, but indirectly. And as I mentioned, the focal point for women will be on the job network board, or there will be someone designated as the focal point for women on the job network boards as an observer. That's really, but the issue of women per se, there's not a separate section on women.
Thank you. Sorry for taking the floor once more. But you mentioned already that there's a bit of tension amongst duty stations, in particular one. What will be the repercussion for choosing, for instance, to go down the advertising track rather than the managed reassignment program track and so on? So that, because if I understand it correctly, if you advertise, you're of course more at liberty of selecting the candidate you want. So you can therefore bypass the managed reassignment program. I'm just wondering, if some duty station managers at duty station choose to only select candidates from within, rather than open up to really have managed mobility within the UN globally.
Yeah, but don't forget that the manager will not be having the same level of input as they were before, but Bettina would...
but isn't it the manager who decides which track to go down?
No.
Who decides that then?
It cannot be decided. If the post is vacant, it has to be advertised. And if it's encumbered with a staff member who has reached the post incumbency limit, it will be part of the reassignment track. And both the advertising track and the reassignment track will be centrally managed. by the joint network boards. So in both cases, the decisions will be made by the JNB and not by the managers. So it really doesn't make a difference.
I didn't realize that also the advertised.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nothing will be done by the manager anymore.
And they're both done on a semi-annual basis. Yeah.
Thank you for this briefing. Very timely for me because I've received so many emails over the weekend, probably by mistake, because I think one of my questions has been answered. The UNODC should not be on Polnet. This will be, I suppose, figured out. Another point is more a general comment. I have the feeling that it will be, because it's all about lateral move, it will be even more difficult to get promotion, I mean to apply for real vacant posts in the higher position. Am I wrong?
I cannot answer if you are right or wrong, but yeah, there will be posts that will be, the incumbent will be determined in the managed mobility track after a certain time. So on one hand, you're opening up posts because people can only stay in posts for a certain period of time. So you're opening up the possibility of more staff movement, so to speak, because the posts become vacant. On the other hand, it's the ones that are in the managed mobility track are being determined by the primarily the job network board. So it's, I haven't done, I can't really answer the question.
In the end, the same posts remain. It's just that the manner that they're advertised and the selection is made is changing. So if before there were so many posts that would be available for promotion of staff, that is still the case. And they will still be available and they will still be advertised. But the selection mechanism is now being centralized. But it's not really, the number of opportunities isn't being reduced. I wouldn't see it as that. It's the process that's changing.
No, just, for the clarity, because if it's a lateral move, imagine there is a position in P5, they will give priority to the people who need to move. This is the logic where they will not.
If it's a vacancy, it has to be advertised, and P4s and P5 can apply. The priority for lateral moves, it's really two separate tracks. The mobility track is only lateral, but these are encumbered posts. These are posts that would not be advertised otherwise. Yeah, so vacancies will continue to be advertised, and those are really, to get a promotion, you have to apply and to an advertised position. So the number of advertised posts would not necessarily, or the number of available posts would not necessarily change. But of course, posts may be filled laterally that may otherwise become available.
With regard to now I know we are talking about mobility today, but it seems linked also to the issue of the change, if I understand correctly, in the way the selection process will be carrying out. And since the mobility track will kick on January, then I assume the selection process will also change as of January. And one point linked also to what you were saying before, if we are losing anyway our roster status within 7 years, let's say we are rostered for a P5, then that is somehow would also affect our options for promotion. Thank you.
Okay, let me just the staff selection track, the vacancy track, let's call it. it was originally intended to be start at the same time, but because of the technological difficulties and the computers, whatever, being run parallel, what they've decided to do is to go ahead and start with the rollout of the first job network, PaulNet, in January, with the vacancy track being postponed some months, and I've heard anywhere being postponed from until March to May. But having said that, in the meantime, you will still have business as usual for all other, for all the posts that are not affected. So the staff select the semi-annual vacancy track will be postponed a few months. But that will not mean that all recruitment and selection will be on hold. It will still, with the exception of PaulNet, continue as it is now. Is that your understanding?
Correct. We in Vienna don't foresee really any changes in the next year because we don't really have any posts in PaulNet. So the current process will continue at least for the next year, and then depending on what job network goes live in 2017, for those posts, the centralized process will take over. But we will have parallel systems and processes for 5 years until all job networks have gone live.
Sorry, and then there was a question, sorry, Ellen, about a question about the roster.
Maybe we can discuss this also later. It's complicated still. This thing of the roster, I'm still not clear when these job networks go alive. How does this thing of the roster works out? I mean, you are losing you start counting 7 years from when. It's just not very clear, but we can discuss this maybe bilaterally and then brief everybody. It's complicated, I think.
But just very quick, my understanding is the roster will begin when the job network rolls out. Stefano?
Thank you, Ilka. I don't want to reopen the Pandora box, and I think this has been already discussed, but just for sake of understanding, of clarification, I'm not sure I understand why majority of the posts of UNODC fall under a job network of development, because development is such an holistic version that also the political affair officers are under development. I think our community is mostly under the rule of law. And in this sense, I wonder why most of the posts on UNODC are not rotational. It's because it's linked to the development job network and not to more specifically specialized knowledge. What I'm trying to say, my skills are transferable. That's what I mean. Of course, in the UNODC, there are a portion of jobs which are transferable, movable. In fact, I moved quite a lot in my career, and it was easy in a sense. I can work most of UN agency, but there is many people in UNODC who I think we invested on a specific knowledge, thematic knowledge, which is very precious. And I wonder, what is the intent of the UN? Do we want to preserve this specific knowledge, this added value, or do we want to disperse it into different places, which I don't want to send the anti-corruption experts doing my job, programming work. After I invested 10, 15 years in their knowledge and specialization. And I say this, though I am fully convinced that the UN has to break down the silo approach in which we are living, very fragmented, but I don't think this is this mobility way of doing things, of sending people around and changing jobs, is not, in my opinion, very correct. We have to maintain the knowledge and build up on specific knowledge of the UN, otherwise it will become irrelevant. And the UNODC is being created. We are part of the Secretariat, but we are being created. Our strength is our substance. So let's maintain this substance. Let's build on the substance. the normative work is the driving force of the UN. Yes, we can move programming people. Of course, maybe a regional desk, sometimes program officer maybe move, but when it comes to specialized expertise, I would be very, very careful in touching that, because that can be a very loss for the entire UN system. Thank you.
No, thank you, Stefano. And that point has come up in the working group discussions, particularly for UNODC. For the internationally recruited staff, I would say the majority of the internationally recruited staff in UNODC were recruited for their specialized knowledge in a particular subject area. I won't go into personal examples, but and that otherwise then, we could, if everybody can do every job, that's not how UNODC was built. And that's not the added value of UNODC. So your point is very well taken. When I when I brought this point up also, let's say, and again, I'll bring up terrorism because that was my job before this one. If you were hired, if I'm hired, which I was for my expertise in a particular subject matter at the time, now you're going to, what are you telling me, that you're going to now move me to go do, I don't know, something else that is not that? And what about those 20 years or 25 years? And the answer was, and then I kind of alluded to this earlier, is, well, there may be comparable positions, like let's say in CTED. So only if there's a comparable position elsewhere, and only if you meet the requirements of the post, and the requirements of the post will be formulated with the input from the program managers. So, and there will be also screening questions. This is now, they're used, I don't want to get into too many details because I don't know exactly where this stands. But at one point, it was thought that there would be a kind of test, generic test across the board for people in certain job families and so on. Now I understand they're thinking more about screening questions. So if you don't pass those screening questions, you don't make it. But my understanding is that they are making every attempt to not to lose the subject matter. But like if you are a drug expert in Vienna and they need somebody with that same drug expertise, I don't know, in New York or in Pretoria or wherever, then that's a potential thing. But if a post requires 20 years of experience in drugs and I don't have that, then I will not be considered for movement onto that post. But your point is very well taken, and it's being raised, and we are doing our best to mitigate any loss of expertise. And on the job networks themselves, I will say that there were, I glossed over things very quickly. There are 9 job networks, and I'm going to read them out to you, and they've been reworked several times over, but this is how they stand. DevNet, which is Economic, Social, and Development Network. This is InfoNet, which is Public Information and Conference Management. LegalNet, which are legal officer. LogNet, which are logistics, transportation, supply chain network. Magnet, I've mentioned. PolNet, I've mentioned. PolNet is not just political officers. Again, I just went over this very quickly. Political, peace, and humanitarian network in PolNet. SafetyNet, which is security. SciNet, which is science network. And ITechNet, information and telecommunication technology. So there's only 9 job networks, and there's almost 50 job families that are divvied up in there. And OHRM has been spending a lot of time in the past year trying to determine exactly which job family each post is in and which job network then. And it's been reformulated several times, but that's how it stands now. But it is a very time-consuming task, to say the least. No, it doesn't for OHRM, and I think even on the portal there may be a link as to how you can determine where you are, and it can very easily be, I'm sure, changed at some point as they go. Nothing's written in stone.
Yes, I can confirm that, Urka, that we received on Friday some additional information from OHRM that there is now a possibility to determine once which job network one's post belongs to on the HR portal, and we'll be disseminating that to staff and sharing that. On the other issue, on the specialized knowledge of UNODC positions and staff, as Urka said, that has been raised and it is acknowledged. But one thing we shouldn't forget is that even mobility can also happen within UNODC, between UNODC positions, between UNODC duty stations, between Vienna and field offices. So yes, it's acknowledged that UNODC staff are very specialized, and in the end it might be that under this DevNet, and by the way, quite a number of positions from our understanding of UNODC are also under LegalNet, so what you alluded to, rule of law. In the end, there might be just movement of UNODC staff between their posts. We'll see how it works out in the end.
Hi, I just have a quick technical question. There are many of us on temporary post, and if a staff member is selected on the regular post once the temporary assignment expires, when does the occupancy start? Does it start when you are selected for the regular post, or is the temporary assignment taken into account? Thank you.
My understanding is that it starts when you are selected for the regular post. But as Urka said, the policy is still in draft form, and we've often in the end received policies that change from what we saw in draft, so I don't want to really confirm this 100%. The policy will come out shortly, and it should be specified there, but currently that's my understanding.
Yeah, and also mind, I mean, let's say you were on a regular post for 2 years, and then you went on a certain post for 2 years, and then you went on a temporary assignment, and then let's say after 1 year you go back onto your original post. The clock, the way it's formulated now, the clock would have stopped during the time that you were on the temporary assignment. That's the way it stands now, but yeah.
Just one last question. I was going to ask about exactly what you said, the mapping of how do you find out whether your position or under which job network your position is, but I understand there's something on the portal then. Yes. A related question, I suppose, is this category of comparable posts that exist somewhere else. Is this determined by reference to the network, the family, the job title, or is there a separate set of criteria? Like what goes into this determination? Who does it? And is this accessible to staff at this point in time, or will it be? Thank you.
It will be done by the job network board for that particular job network, and there's a lot of people will be on each of those networks. I think anywhere between 20 to 40. And they will be looking at that, and what they are supposed to be looking at are, the functions, the expertise, the experience, the education that you need. But it's the job network boards that will be determining the comparable posts, if any. Did that answer your question? Not really.
No, it did. It did. It just question whether this information is also accessible. Let's say.
Which information? Which posts are going to be in the pool? You mean, or how exactly? I mean, there are some guidance so far on what issues to look at in order to determine that. But the proceedings of the job network boards on this matter, I cannot recall that any indication that would be made public. The final result would be known, but yeah.
I think just to clarify, I suppose what's relatively clear is which posts according to, I suppose, job titles, because that kind of maps it into the network. So which post would be in the network is clear, but network is the broadest term. For instance, terrorism prevention, the example you gave, would probably fall under the development network, just like many of the other UNODC posts.
Well, it may or may not. Maybe it could be a legal officer, maybe whatever, yeah. But anyway, yeah.
But within that category, you would, let's say if it's in the legal, you might have terrorism prevention alongside corruption, alongside, I don't know, rule of law in a completely different field. So that's a different determination whether that's comparable or not. And that level is what I was interested in. If you would ever see, okay, the posts that are in my branch, let's say, have comparable posts in New York in CTED. That's a known example. But then for many other others that are under the same network, but maybe not, comparable to the CTED ones, but comparable to something else, would that be known? That I think is a question. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but it's a little bit lower than the level of the network, which is the broadest term.
Right, and that determination will be made by the joint network boards. And if there's no comparable position to yours in the system, your post will be non-rotational. And it will be listed as non-rotational. But, yeah. And also, just because posts are in let's say in the same unit or a same branch, doesn't mean they're comparable. Yeah, no. Okay. Lunchtime. Thanks so much for your interest, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more about this as things develop. Thanks.